If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. The castle that was never finished dying. The road from Angers cuts through the Anjou valley in long, quiet stretches. Saffron fields on one side, dark vineyard soil on the other. The air carrying something faintly mineral, faintly old. Then the hill appears, modest by any measure, and rising from it, something that is not modest at all. 7 towers, 17 staircases, 204 rooms, the tallest chateau in France, and the only one still lived in by the same noble family across nearly 5 centuries. In summer, its private theater stages operas, its vineyards still produce wine. It does not feel like a relic. It feels like a place that never agreed to become one. But beneath that solidity, something moves. Residents speak of it plainly, without theater. Staff have left without explanation. Guests have described a figure, pale, wounded, dressed in green, passing through rooms that were locked. The chateau began as a military post in the 11th century, held by the Counts of Anjou, absorbed into the Plantagen inheritance, built to control land rather than impress anyone. It was besieged, damaged, rebuilt, and besieged again across 3 medieval centuries before René de Cassé purchased it in 1502 and decided a place of war should become a place of culture. His descendants rose, marshals, court survivors, men who outlasted kings. Then the second duke commissioned a rebuild. Jacques Corbineau drew the plans. The old towers came down, partially. The new classical wing rose, partially. The money ran out, or the ambition did, and the project simply stopped. What remained was neither the old chateau nor the new one. Walls from different centuries stand pressed against each other, the demolished and the completed and the merely planned, existing side by side in permanent, unresolved tension. The building could not finish erasing what it had been, and it was not the only thing here that refused to disappear when it was supposed to. Charlotte and the Count. Her name was Charlotte de Brézé. Historical records describe her as exceptionally beautiful, and some accounts place her as the illegitimate daughter of King Charles VII and his celebrated mistress Agnès Sorel. A detail that, if true, made her not simply a noblewoman, but a woman carrying royal blood in an age when such things carried enormous weight. Around 1461, she married Jacques de Brézé, a powerful Norman lord with land, influence, and a temper that the historical record does nothing to soften. The marriage was difficult almost immediately. What happened next in 1476 is documented clearly enough that no one disputes the basic facts. Jacques returned to his chateau at Rouve and found Charlotte in circumstances he chose to read as adultery with one of his huntsmen. He killed them both. The violence was severe. Legal proceedings followed, a conviction was recorded, a fine was paid, and a royal pardon was eventually granted. The machinery of 15th century French justice moved exactly as one might expect it to move when a powerful nobleman killed his wife. Slowly, leniently, and without much interest in her version of events. Whether Charlotte was actually guilty, whether the huntsman was what Jacques claimed, whether any witness told the truth, none of that is confirmed anywhere. What is harder to explain is how her story arrived at Brissac at all. She died in Normandy. She lived in Normandy. Yet somewhere across the centuries, through aristocratic marriages and inherited bloodlines too tangled to trace cleanly, her identity fused with something already stirring at Brissac, an older local unease, stories of sounds in the night, of something moving through the upper rooms. The two accounts merged until they became one. Charlotte became the Green Lady, a figure with a partially decomposed face, hollow eye sockets, a mouth frozen open. Her dress, green, a color carrying clear meaning in medieval French tradition, bound tightly to jealousy and betrayal. The Cassé-Brissac family, one of France's most distinguished noble houses, has kept this story at the center of how the chateau presents itself to the world. They speak of her openly. They invite the question, but why a family of genuine historical standing would choose to anchor its identity to a murder that almost certainly did not happen within these walls? That question sits at the heart of everything, and no one has yet answered it cleanly. The room at the top of the tower. Today, Château de Brissac operates as a working heritage estate. Tours through gilded staterooms, suits of armor standing at attention in long corridors. Summer opera performed in its private theater. Wine from the estate's own vineyards poured for visitors who stay the night in beds that predate the revolution. It is a living place, not a preserved one, and the current Duc de Brissac speaks of the Green Lady in a tone that resists easy categorization. Not dismissive, not theatrical, something quieter. The measured speech of a man who has carried a story so long he can no longer be certain where the story ends and his own experience begins. He has acknowledged, in documented interviews, that there are rooms in the chateau where he prefers not to be after dark. He attributes this to atmosphere, to the cold that old stone holds, to the particular quality of silence in spaces that have witnessed centuries of human life. He has not claimed to have seen the Green Lady. He has not suggested the question is not worth asking. The tower room sits at the top of one of the original medieval towers, reached by a spiral staircase that predates the Renaissance rebuilding entirely. Staff accounts, gathered across several decades, describe the same things independently. A cold that does not match the adjacent rooms, sounds resembling breathing, the persistent feeling of being watched from an empty corner. In the 1990s, a household staff member reported waking to a figure standing near the foot of the bed, a woman in green, the face described only as wrong. The light stayed on until morning. A room change was requested before breakfast. There is no reason to doubt the witness experienced something real. What that something was remains open. Formal investigations have recorded anomalous temperature drops, infrasound frequencies within the range known to produce unease, and EMF fluctuations with no identified electrical source. Each finding is unexplained. None of it constitutes evidence of anything beyond the physical. The witnesses. If this were a story told only once, by one kind of person, in one century, it would be simple enough to set aside. But the accounts attached to Château de Brissac do not behave that way. They come from nobles and clergy, from military men and household servants, and in the modern era, from paying guests, Americans, Germans, British tourists, who booked a night in a castle and expected nothing more unusual than cold stone and old furniture. The earliest written traces, letters, and household records from the 17th and 18th centuries do not use the word ghost. What they describe is an atmosphere. Certain rooms went unused. Servants declined specific duties after dark, without offering clear reasons. A figure was noted in the tower corridors, a woman, pale, moving strangely, whom no member of the family recognized as their own. The face in these early accounts is never described clearly. The green dress came later. It does not appear as a fixed detail until the 19th century, and a folklore scholar would find that pattern immediately familiar. Oral traditions grow. Each generation layers meaning onto what it inherited. But that explains the elaboration. It does not explain what was there at the beginning, the original disturbance that started the accumulation. What held constant across every era was not the color of her clothing. It was the place, the same tower, the same corridor, and the feeling. Modern guests describe waking between 2 and 4 in the morning to a drop in temperature, and a female figure in pale or green, her posture or expression radiating something close to anguish. Almost none of them report being touched. Nothing moves. She does not act. She is simply there, enduring. And that passivity, that stillness, is perhaps the detail that sits most uneasily, because it is exactly what you would expect from a woman who was killed and never permitted to leave. What the stone remembers, the most reasonable place to start is with what the building itself can do. Medieval towers like those at Brissac, thick limestone walls, narrow windows, drainage channels cut beneath the original foundations, are known to conduct and reshape sound in striking ways. Wind moving through underground channels, water in old stonework, animals in the fabric of the walls. Acoustic archaeologists studying comparable structures across France and Britain have documented how these forces combine to produce sounds that, heard in an enclosed space, are nearly indistinguishable from human breathing, moaning, or whispering. The stone does not need a ghost to speak. It needs only age, density, and the right shape. The cold pockets reported in the tower follow a similar logic. Dense limestone retains cold far longer than modern materials and releases it unevenly, depending on air circulation and wall thickness. A sudden chill in a specific corridor is, in most cases, a question of thermal mass, not of presence. The electromagnetic fluctuations recorded by investigation teams are harder to dismiss cleanly, but old and partially rewired electrical infrastructure, modified across decades, can generate exactly the kind of irregular readings that investigation equipment picks up. Without site-specific analysis, certainty is impossible, but the explanation is available. Then there is the mind itself. Guests who arrive at a castle already knowing its story are not neutral observers. Sleep paralysis, a documented neurological state at the edge of waking, produces vivid, culturally shaped hallucinations. A sleeping person in an unfamiliar place, processing unfamiliar sounds through a story just received, is not a reliable instrument. This account is coherent, supported by research, and explains a great deal, but not all of it. The acoustic explanation does not account for the figure, something seen, not heard. The psychological argument does not reach the household staff and long-term residents who reported experiences without the priming that tourists carry in with them. The sleep paralysis case collapses against accounts that occurred in daylight, during waking hours, in the middle of ordinary tasks. And the electromagnetic theory says nothing about why the disturbances have been reported in the same locations across centuries that predate electrical infrastructure entirely. A third possibility, that limestone, a piezoelectric material, may retain and replay residues of intense human experience through mechanisms current science cannot yet measure, is not accepted science. It is a hypothesis, not a demonstration. But it is the only framework that explains the pattern without requiring the stone to be entirely silent. Each explanation, followed to its end, returns the investigator to the same tower, the same corridor, the same cold room at the top of the medieval stairs. None of them close the door. The open question. Some things about Brissac are not in dispute. The chateau has stood since the 11th century. The Château de Brissac family has lived there for 500 years without interruption. The medieval towers were never demolished. They remain, half-built, absorbed into a grander structure that was never finished. These are stone facts. They do not bend. Charlotte de Brézé existed. A woman of that name, of royal descent, was killed at a Norman chateau in 1476 by a husband who believed she had been unfaithful. That is documented. What is not documented, what cannot currently be proven, is any direct connection between her life, her death, and Brissac specifically. The tradition places her here. The historical record does not confirm it. That gap is real, and it has never been closed. What has accumulated across centuries in the weaker but persistent record of oral and written accounts is this: sounds in corridors, cold air in specific rooms, electromagnetic disturbances, and a female figure seen repeatedly in a tower that was scheduled for demolition 400 years ago and somehow never was. The accounts are consistent in location and in the feeling they produce: dread, stillness, the sense of being watched. Whether that consistency reflects something real or something passed down and absorbed is a question each framework answers differently, and none answers completely. Acoustic theory explains the sounds. Neurological theory explains the figures. The stone tape hypothesis explains the repetition. But none of them explains why the cold sits in that room and not the next one. None of them explains why she has persisted, not as legend, but as experience, across 5 centuries of a family that does not overclaim, does not sensationalize, and still keeps the guest rooms open because she has never once harmed anyone. She has only ever appeared and frightened and returned. Charlotte de Brézé died in 1476. Something has been waking people at 3 in the morning ever since. What that something is remains precisely and stubbornly unanswered.